The world tends to revolve around what I would call a truncated definition of success, because leaders, the best ones, they do get results. Let's make no mistake about it. No apologies. They get results, but they also value relationships. There's a genius of the and. Leaders and organizations that can take two things that appear to be at odds, and from time to time, they may even be at odds. And when you find a way to value both, you release the power and the tension between those concepts. If you want to maximize results, we believe the key is in valuing results and relationships.
You must have learned so much over the years, working at Chick-fil-A and then the work you do with leaders. In your book, Uncommon Greatness, the 5 Fundamentals to Transform Your Leadership, I read it getting ready for this interview, loved it in so many different ways.
Thank you.
What inspired you to write this book? I think I know, but I'd love for our listeners to hear it.
Well, it's a backstory with 2 different explanations. And so I'll give it to you briefly and we'll go wherever you want to go. But we did this original work about 25 years ago. In fact, a little more than 25 years ago, we started the work that ultimately became Uncommon Greatness. And we began that journey because we needed to accelerate leadership development. We being Chick-fil-A. I was on staff there at that point. And one of the first things we realized is that we didn't have a common definition of leadership. And I see this in so many organizations, even today, quarter of a century later. I think this is one of the culprits that prevents organizations who do want to grow more leaders. They don't have alignment and they don't have agreement on what leadership means, what leaders do, what does it look like? And so that tends to make their efforts to improve challenging at best. And so we started this work with that in mind. So that was the original intent. We can come back to that if you want to. Fast forward almost 25 years. And Chick-fil-A said, this was my last project before I left the organization. They said, hey, you've written 2 books about leadership, which is true. We wrote the original book. I partnered with Ken Blanchard. We wrote The Secret. And it was about 4 of the fundamentals in this book. And then we had written another book about the 5th fundamental. And that book was called The Heart of Leadership. And so the organization realized that it was really those 2 books together that told the story of leadership that we believed to be true. And they said, can you put these 2 books into one? And so that's the more near term reason we really just tried to synthesize some of the work and some of the things we've learned over the last 25 years into one book, and it became Uncommon Great.
Yeah. And so much good stuff in there. I get to work with a lot of organizations as well, and I virtually never see a definition of what it means to be a leader in the organization, let alone leadership behaviors or traits that are listed out. And
let me give you a fun stat on that. We did a survey. We'll probably talk about some of those results as we go through this conversation. But when we were updating this book, let me just say this about the 2 books, in essence. That first one, 25 years ago, was fueled with a lot of qualitative research. And we looked at global best practices. We read a couple hundred books on leadership, and we interviewed a lot of leaders, and we did the best we could. And we feel good about it. That book's in 27 languages today. So that there's truth there. However, when we had the opportunity to refresh and to retell the story, we said, let's go do some quantitative work. And we may learn some things. We hope we'll validate what we said 20 plus years ago, which we did. But we said, we'll probably learn some things. And one of the things we learned is that chief executive officers and, C-suite leadership, to be more specifically, 60% of them say their organization has an agreed upon definition of leadership, which you can debate good or bad, 60%. I've been with a lot of leadership groups. It was not that high, but here's the real kicker. When you talk to frontline supervisors, over 70% of them say they are unaware if their organization has a definition, they don't know what it is.
And the ones that do, it's more of a marketing slogan. It just feels good, looks good, sounds good, might be on the wall, nice, expensive wallpaper, which is nice. But there's no real meat behind it. And I love the simplest foundational definition for me is leaders in any organization. Their job is to get results and foster an environment where every team member is intrinsically motivated and empowered to create more value over time. And so when you talk about, leaders need to be passionate about results and passionate about relationships and getting both right. That was always the second part for me. There's still, a company I sold in 2016, at least 100 people I stay in touch with. So the relationship part and the results, if you get the relationship part right, the results are always better. So talk through that a little bit. I mean, it's such a simple way to look at it, but powerful.
Sure. And I think you're ahead of your time and ahead of your peers, which may be one of many reasons why you've been so successful over the years. The world tends to revolve around what I would call a truncated definition of success, because leaders, the best ones, they do get results. Let's make no mistake about it. No apologies. They get results, but they also value relationships. It's just what you just said. There's a genius of the and, to borrow a term from Jim Collins, right? Leaders and organizations that can take two things that appear to be at odds. And from time to time, they may even be at odds. And when you find a way to value both, you release the power and the tension between those concepts. And so if you want to maximize results, we believe the key is in valuing results and relationships.
Yeah, I love that. What I intentionally did, and I feel like we're so aligned here, we had to get results and we had a measure that, basically showed you the valuation of the company and how you looked at it in our space. But I looked at the emotional energy piece and said, hey, you know what? Positive emotional energy is the X factor for leaders, right? Positive energy, good times, especially bad times, always talking about where we're going passionately, engaging in productive conversations and how to actually get there. And then on the spiritual value creation side, in the context of a business, for me, it's about connectedness. So all these rituals and programs and things to help employees develop stronger, more meaningful relationships. And that always drove higher profitability and cash flow. So I broke it into three pieces. It just made sense for me around that. How does that land on you, given all the work that you're doing?
It sounds perfectly aligned with what we've experienced and what we've been able to discern from looking at research and global best practices. As a matter of fact, that connectedness you describe, this is a little bit of a sidebar, but we actually think that's the differentiator for high performance teams. If you got talent and skills, you can have a good team. But you can only have a great team when you add, we call it community. It sounds like you call it connectedness, but leaders can facilitate that and leaders can make that part of their strategy. It sounds like that's what you did. It's what all great teams do.
Yeah. And for me, again, just sort of a big bucket, spiritual value creation, connectedness, which means something different a little bit to significantly to everybody, every family, every team member, along the way. So I'm really curious. Leadership development for me is interesting. A partner that was in my one of my current businesses, ETW, was Jack Welch before he passed, and he and I became very good friends. And we both agreed that probably 90% of the money spent on leadership development is wasted in the United States because it's kind of a one size fits all. And I love surgical leadership development. What does each leader need to be able to create more value going forward? I got that from your work too, reading the book. Is that how you think about it?
Maybe not exactly in those terms. And I hope it's not 90%, but it's probably north of 80%. It's wasted, but it's wasted for several reasons. You mentioned one of them. You mentioned one size fits all. Okay. One size fits one. Now, I will say, I think even as it relates to our work, there is a core curriculum. There are some fundamentals. And then once you move past that, then I think it needs to be bespoke. it needs to be so that you can close critical gaps and leverage the strengths of individual leaders. But that's only one reason it's not effective. Another reason it's not effective is where we started this conversation, is so many organizations don't have a clear definition. This is where we were 25 years ago, and we wondered why we were having trouble developing leaders. It's because marketing defined it this way and operations defined it this way. And in some departments, different leaders defined it different ways. Well, where's the synergy in that, right? Which raised all kind of issues. Who do you recruit? Who do you select? Who do you recognize? Who do you promote? How do you train the ones you have? So that creates dysfunction. And then the last thing I would just mention, if we're going to make a short list of why so many of those dollars are wasted, is there's no scope and sequence. You know, when a little kid goes to school, you don't start them with algebra or trigonometry. You start them with numbers, and then they learn to add, and then they learn to subtract, and so forth and so on. You stay at it long enough, you may learn trig and calculus and all that other fun stuff. So many organizations, I call it random acts of training. And it doesn't make sense. And a lot of times leaders don't have the knowledge base, the foundation they need to even process these new ideas, these new principles, and these new practices. So there are a lot of reasons that much of what is invested today in the name of leadership development shouldn't be.
Yeah. Well, I like the way you kind of frame it there. First, I love the one size fits one. 100% agree with that. There are fundamentals, no question, that I think are universal for leadership and apply. And when I look at a leader that's setting in a role, I want to know, hey, for your function, or maybe if you're the CEO, how was your job designed to create value? How was your team designed to create value? And how do I know it's increasing? And when you look at the work they're doing, there's always, like, almost immediately exposed one or two things they need to develop in right now to move the results in the right direction, or go faster, even if they're, hitting their numbers in there. So that's why I kind of think about it as surgical leadership development. But your one size fits one is perfect.
Yeah, I've not heard that term before, but I'll probably use it. That's a very vivid picture. I love that.
Oh yeah. That's awesome. And just one side note, and then I've got a question for you. Something that I did when leaders hired somebody, and the biggest company I've ever built from scratch had about 500 team members, 64 leaders. I told the leaders, if somebody leaves for any reason whatsoever, you have to follow them for at least a year after they leave. Check in on them, how are they doing, whatever that is. And it was wild how even the most disgruntled employees, the really disgruntled ones I would follow, didn't matter where they were at. Within a year or two, if they went to a prospective customer, they would send us work. But if we didn't talk to them at all, that would never happen going forward. So anyway, talking about relationships, what a cool way to do that, I think, for any of our listeners to do it. So my question for you is, and all this time at Chick-fil-A, for me, as I went along, I would figure something out and my results would get better. And I would move along, I'd figure something out, my results would get better. What were one or two things that you figured out from a leadership standpoint that caused your results to take a big sort of material step forward?
A couple that come to mind. One, we're talking about it right now, is when we agreed that this is how we're going to define it. I remember after we had done this work, we were doing a training for new supervisors. It was really an orientation. It was a half-day program. What we called it, Welcome to Leadership. And one of the senior most leaders said he wanted to come and speak. And we're kind of going, great, this will be fantastic, with a little bit of, we're not sure what he's going to talk about. And so we figured it out where he was going to have a few remarks over lunch at the end of the day. So we've taught them the serve model that Uncommon Greatness is built around. And we had just really finished this work, and he stood up and he said, I don't know if you guys like this leadership model or not. He said, it's not my favorite. And we're all going, oh my gosh. It's like, where is he going? Is he trying to undo everything we've just done? He said, but we've agreed that this is going to be our definition. And the power is that we have a definition. And so I was so thankful he showed up, because there were probably people in the room going, I don't like that definition. And I think we should define it differently. But he kind of said, no, no, I don't really care what your favorite definition is. And you can use that on your own time. But for us, this is how we're going to define leadership. And that was a defining moment for us. And I think a lot of good things happen and are still happening. The organization is still using this model 25 years later. So that was one.
Yeah. How quickly did you see a change in results once you did it? Because what I got out of what you just said is, hey, we're going to be really intentional about this and we're going to be consistent about it. So once you did that, what was different in the next 12 months versus the previous 12 months, if you can remember?
Well, I don't even know that I can point to any single metric because we had been operating corporately without a point of view that was shared and common. And then our restaurants they still are independently operated. So we could not, nor would we want to prescribe a leadership point of view, but we could share ours. And many of them embraced it because see, they didn't have one either. So what we saw is I would say hands down greater efficacy in training, educating, and developing new leaders just to start with. It's like, because they didn't even know what it meant. And we said, well, we're going to tell you what it means. And as we've outlined in the book, we decided to go with a behavioral based definition. I mean, there are tens of thousands of definitions out there. 25 years ago, we found 6,000 definitions. So who knows how many there are today. And many of them are academic or they're theoretical or they're abstract. We said, no, we're going to have a behavioral based definition so that we can tell our leaders, here's what you need to do. And we just began to see those behaviors. And Chick-fil-A has had a long, steady climb of success, really even predating this work. But I would argue that this helped us scale. You know, it was a very small organization 25, 30, 40 years ago, and now it's approaching 25 billion. And so to have a common point of view is a really big deal.
About how many corporate employees at Chick-fil-A?
About 3,000 corporate. And then our restaurants employ probably around 500,000 hourly team members, but those employees work for those restaurant operators. So it's become a pretty big organization.
That's a lot of families that have somebody contributing to supporting the family. So hats off to you for being part of creating something like that. Just incredible.
Yeah. So let me give you one more. You asked for a couple. I'll give you one more. And this was kind of hard fought. And I say hard fought. We just were slow to figure this out. We spent almost 2 decades trying to figure out why some teams flourish, but most flounder. And it's what we talked about a few minutes ago. It's like there's this other ingredient that if you leave it to chance, it will show up every now and then. In fact, Katzenbach and Smith wrote a book, The Wisdom of Teams, and they said, if you leave what you and I are talking about, this connection or community, or if you leave it to chance, their research revealed you'll get it about once in your entire career. And we said, nope, we think that's the difference maker, and we're going to facilitate that. Building community is going to become part of our strategy. And I think our teams across the board corporately and those in the restaurants that chose to adopt this model, I would argue that their performance went up exponentially.
That's incredible. What are a couple of things that you do or did to intentionally build community?
The answer is you've got to define it. And as you and I touched on it, we may define it slightly differently. I think that's cool. We've got the spirit of it, but a leader has to define it. And then once you define it, you can facilitate it. So our definition starts with a place where people know and are known. Well, you facilitate that and you build in time, energy, and effort for people to tell their stories and for people to share their hopes and their dreams and their fears. And, you know, when you're starting out, it can be really simple stuff about their favorite colors and about, you know, their favorite childhood memory or whatever. But community is cumulative over time, and so is knowing and being known. And we find that that's the foundation. Another thing you can do is to serve willingly, where serving it becomes part of what the group does. A fun story about that was the football coach, Lou Holt. Some of your audience may remember him. Won the national championship at Notre Dame, started his career in the 60s at Arkansas, and was at South Carolina at the end of his career. And they had at one point, I think, 13, 14 games in a row they won over 2 seasons. It was an amazing stretch from a team that had not been very good previously. And I had a chance to talk to the coach about what they had done. And he didn't use the word community, but what he basically said is they stumbled upon it. Because I mentioned earlier, you need talent and skills. Well, he's providing the skills the same way he did in 1966. He's still recruiting Division I athletes, but he unlocked the power of, again, what we would call community. And one of the things he said that he did is he had the players tell their stories. And he said it's really hard for the players said it's hard to give up on somebody once you know their story. So that's that knowing and being known. I said, well, what else did you do? And he said, well, we also found it was really good if we would serve each other. So he and I had this conversation a decade after we kind of formed our point of view. So this is kind of fun to hear him articulate it from a whole different perspective. And I said, well, how did you facilitate serving? He said, well, a lot of ways. But he said, one, at the end of every practice, I'd bring the team together and I'd say, how can we serve each other? And somebody'd say, I need a ride. Well, where are you going? And somebody give them a ride. And somebody said, I got a math test tomorrow. And the coach says, anybody here do math? And they'd figure out what kind of math test it was and who might be able to help that student study. And he said that just became part of their culture was serving. But what he was doing, he was turbocharging the performance of the team. And the third and final thing I'd say that you can do to create and to nurture and to facilitate community is create a place where people do life together. You know, I'm not sure where this idea came up that you need to leave your personal life out there. Well, because that's who we are as human beings. And so we encourage people to bring their personal life to work. Now I'll tell you an extreme example. Let's stick with the coach for a minute. He said, I did a few other things that really brought the team together. This is kind of his language. I said, well, give me some examples. And he said, I took their car keys away from them. I said, you did what? He said, yeah, I told them we had to go everywhere together on the bus. I said, oh, okay. I said, what else did you do? He said, well, I quit letting them live off campus. He said, and I even brought them all into one dorm because I wanted us to do life together. And so all these pieces and parts contribute to this hard to get your head around, sometimes hard to articulate place that actually is the difference maker for the elite teams in the world. Yeah, you got to have talent, you got to have skills, but that'll get you to a level of proficiency. It won't get you to a level of sustained levels of elite performance.
Yeah, I don't remember when they started talking about this concept of work-life balance, but the first time I heard it, it was obviously a long time ago, it never made sense to me. It's just one big blended life. And why would we not want to make it personal in a healthy way at work? Like, let's go for it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But a leader has to prioritize this. One more quick side story on that. One of my practices over the years when I would start a new team, and I didn't always do this, but it was pretty typical for me to lead and facilitate a few meetings to try and set the tone and how we're going to do this and what's going to be on the agenda. And I've already tapped somebody like, all right, you're going to take this responsibility. And so when I felt like it was time to switch it to them, I said, hey, put together the agenda for the next meeting. Let's look at it before the meeting. Cause I figured I'd rather coach him to be successful than coach him afterwards if he, hadn't figured it out yet, or I hadn't modeled it sufficiently. And so the first thing I noticed, there was no community building time on the agenda. And he said, well, we're busy. We don't have time for that. And I said, okay. So that let me know he wasn't ready to take over that team. I said, this is part of the strategy. This is part of how we're going to drive performance over time. So no, you can't say we're only going to do this when we have time. Well, when will you do it? At the Christmas party? I mean, that'd be it, right? Because you never have time. But I said, you got to make this part of your strategy. It's part of our strategy for high performance.
Yeah. And it has to be operationalized. That's really what you're saying. So what are the frameworks and systems to ensure great financial results and frameworks and systems to build stronger relationships, community, all that stuff. Yeah.
It's got to be operationalized and it's got to be prioritized. Back to results in relationships. It's like, well, that feels soft. Let's go after just the results. It's like, no, that's a dead end street. That you're sub-optimizing your performance if you just go for performance.
Yeah. Well, I think we've moved away from strong communities in the last decade or so, maybe the last couple of decades. And that's probably one of the biggest things that we need to kind of get healthy again. I have a number of clients. One of them, the board asked me to come in and help with the organization. It's called Dinner Table. And so, and that was in May. So in 6 months flat, we are basically a community of families raising kids to create value in the world and a place to go for, parents to share practical family wisdom. This morning, we crossed through 17,000 parents in our community in 6 months flat. It's amazing, man. There's just such a hunger for this out there. And one of the things I love about what you're advocating in the book and talking about here is that we can start with our companies and go out from there. And we have communities that we interact with there, right? We have our customers, suppliers, the places that we're located. Did you do much work around that in terms of building? You had the internal team, you have the stores, but the communities that they're in and that you engage with.
Well, corporately, we've done a lot corporately, but I think the spirit of your question, our local operators have done that. That's part of the magic of the model, is that the men and women who operate those restaurants, they have an ownership mentality. And that's just based on the way the financial deal is structured, right? They're tied directly to profits in a significant way. And so they want to grow the top line and the bottom line. And Truett Cathy, our founder, was really keen on influence beyond the restaurant. And so that legacy continues today. And you've got restaurant operators. I know one operator's on 10 boards in his community. So that's how he spends his time. He said, I'm serving the community. The team runs the restaurant. I'm serving the community. And so again, that's probably a bit of an outlier, but many operators, they're partnering in their schools and they're visiting the hospitals and they're doing hunger relief projects and on and on and on. You just name your venue or your opportunity to serve. And that's part of, I think, the culture of those local restaurants. So operators are doing much more of that than we are corporately. In fact, we defer to them. A lot of times, I did it a couple of weeks ago. I've been out of the business officially for over a year now, and people are still calling and saying, can you serve our community? Because they know me or found my name or read a book and, we'd love to serve your community. Call the local operator. And I always say, if they aren't able to help you, call me back. Nobody's ever called me back. It's like the local operators are embedded in their communities. And that's one thing that I think makes the model work.
Yeah. There's such a big difference in my experience between those that I want to make as much money as I can and those that really want to create a lot of holistic value, I call it, for their team members, for their customers and all of it. They always do better when they're looking at holistic value, and the ones who want to make a bunch of money as quickly as they can never do as good over the long run. Maybe a short run, they might have a little bit, but never that much over the long run. So a question I have for, mid-sized businesses, I guess really any size, but certainly large ones. What are your thoughts on compensating for that? Because I can look at examples like Boeing. So I came out of aerospace. I had an aftermarket company. We had customers in 60 countries, thousands of them. Safety was everything, reliability, everything. And my guess is at Boeing, they started compensating based on quarterly earnings, not safety, reliability, quality, innovation, that kind of stuff. How do you recommend, or what are your thoughts around compensating for both results and for the relationship side that you're talking about here?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We believe that if you've got the right leader, they understand that relationships are key to success. And so we have stuck with historical financial metrics. Now, we measure a lot of things. The operators measure a lot of things, and we have our finger on the pulse. Operators have their finger on the pulse of all these things, whether it be team member engagement or customer satisfaction. So we think all that matters. But part of Truett's magic, I think, when he created this model was we wanted to set up men and women to be in business for themselves, but not by themselves. And they are completely vested psychologically, emotionally, and certainly with their time, energy, and effort. And the vast majority of them, I don't know the current numbers, probably 80% operate just one restaurant. There are some that have two, and then a handful when I left that had three. But the model was you needed this focused leadership, and you still do, even if they have two or three locations. What those men and women have done is they've demonstrated their ability to replicate themselves, and then market conditions created the necessity for multiple restaurants in close proximity. But we have historically just said, let's compensate for the bottom line and have business people in there that have the right perspective, the right attitude, and the right time horizon in mind. These folks are in it for the long haul. When I left, we had 96% operator retention year over year for probably 40 years. So if you're in it for the long haul, we tend to think all of us make the best decisions when we have the long view in mind. And clearly these operators do.
Yeah, 100%. That's a giant lesson, I think, for all of us. And I've always said, if you get the people part right, the leadership part right, the culture, all of that, that's what's really going to drive a long-term sustained growth and the financial results. So 100% agree. And as you were talking, I was just thinking, if we're operationalizing the relationship stuff, that could be something that says, hey, we're going to incentivize you on the financial results. But if there isn't evidence that you're consistently doing these things or operationalizing the people stuff, that could detract from it potentially, just to ensure it's happening. But we don't want them checking boxes maliciously either.
And let me say, that could work in some organizations. That could not work the way Chick-fil-A is structured, because those men and women who operate the restaurants are independent business people. And so we have to maintain an arm's length relationship on management and leadership practices. They're at the sole discretion of that local operator. Yeah. Their commitment to the organization is to adhere to operating and brand standards, and they determine the methods.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out, how do we get to showing more leaders the value of this? Because a lot of them, they don't intrinsically feel the value of it. So what are the steps we could kind of walk them through? Have you seen that, to where, hey, they're here for a while, now they get it? And what was the epiphany moment for them?
We believe people change for only one of three reasons. If you can add more to this list, I'd love to hear from you. But this is the list we've been working with for a long time. They change, and it can be a combination. I don't want to say these are exclusive, but three things is all we can figure out. They change because of vision. They change because of pain, or fear of future consequences. Vision, pain, or fear of future consequences. And you may use a combination of those strategies as you're trying to move the ball down the field. What we have learned over the years is that vision is the least efficient and most effective. Pain and fear of future consequences are much more expedient, but if you're not careful, what you'll end up with is a compliance culture as opposed to a commitment culture. I talked to a leader recently in an organization. I should know how big they are. They're probably in the Fortune 50. And they have this huge turnover problem. Like millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars of turnover. And I began to talk to this leader about that problem. And I asked him about their strategy. And their strategy was checklist. That was the answer. Checklist. And I said, okay. I said, that probably will get you compliance. And I said, but I doubt it gets you commitment. And it might be what's driving your turnover. Because I think from what you're telling me, if people don't do their checklist, you fire them. It's like there's another whole way to do this where people want to do the right thing and they want to do the right thing the right way every time. Have you ever thought about like that's a whole different strategy? But they're not going to change until vision, pain, or fear of future consequences. And so maybe the pain lever in this case is those turnover numbers are going to get so high, they're going to have to try a different strategy. Checklists aren't going to get them there. I love checklists, by the way, but not as the answer to a question about what's your strategy to deal, for performance of a multi-billion-dollar company. That's way too simplistic. And I think you get what you get.
Yeah. Well, for sure, I don't want to have pain and fear as a strategy to get results. That would just.
Well, but no, let me give you an example of that. I think it's legit. Well, the pain is a little like maybe you hope you don't go there. But if a Chick-fil-A restaurant, if there's going to be another restaurant, I'm thinking back 20, 25 years ago, my career, I worked in the operations group. And I had a conversation, had several of these, with restaurant operators who were anticipating a new location. And we could say with full transparency that, well, based on your current levels of performance, if there is another location, you won't be qualified for it. Like, really? I've had to go, really? Right. Let's talk about what it would take if we build that restaurant. There was a fear of future consequences there because they would know that they would lose that income potential. So I don't think that's bad. I think truth is our friend, right? Let's, the best leaders confront reality. We've always said that. And so I don't think that's a terrible strategy for helping someone change. I don't think it's as good as vision. I wish we didn't need that conversation, right? They had already caught a vision for maximizing the performance of their business, but somewhere along the way, they had missed that. So we're going to use a different strategy.
Yeah. And I guess I'd put it in two categories. We have healthy pain and fear and unhealthy pain and fear. Because I think through struggle, we all grow and I value it. Even unhealthy struggles, there's so much value to come out of that as well. That's just how we grow.
And let me give you another example, just following that same storyline. I know some of the restaurant operators who were denied a second location. I think that would be the pain lever. And then some of them responded, closed those critical gaps, and they got the next multi-restaurant opportunity. So yeah, I think all three of those levers can work, but we chose as an organization, your listeners can do what they feel led to do. We chose to always lead with vision because that's where that's the best way to do it. If you can cast a compelling and credible picture of the future and help people understand how they can get there, that's the best way to do it. So to your point, how do you help somebody change that doesn't see the stuff we're talking about? You got those three options or some combination. That's all I know to do.
Yeah, I love it. So when you say vision is the least efficient, talk about that. I agree with you, by the way. It's always been so important for me and constantly passionately talking about what's possible and where we're going and engaging everybody in productive conversation and action to actually get there. But why do you say least efficient and what are the best ways to keep that going from your view? I got a lot out of your book and podcast, but yeah, for our listeners.
Yeah. All right. So a couple thoughts on that. It's the least efficient because it takes continuing effort. So that's at the highest level, right? If you share with someone consequences and they can make a decision, or somebody feels pain and they'll react or respond. But when you start talking about a preferred future that is yet to be realized, right? It sometimes, and you know this, sometimes it feels weird to people because what you're describing actually doesn't exist, which is why I think most people think the best leaders are a little bit crazy because we see the unseen. We see stuff nobody else sees, and then we start trying to convince people. And if you really want commitment, you've got to bring them on that journey. And it's probably not in one fell swoop, right? They may go from strong disbelief to some disbelief to neutral to some belief to strong belief. And that could take multiple encounters and multiple explanations. And so the time required and the never ending demands of vision make it a little bit inefficient. But there's one more reason it's inefficient. And this is something a lot of leaders I think are either stumbling on or have not yet learned. Too many leaders communicate vision in their preferred learning style. But Howard Gardner out of Harvard and others have pioneered multiple intelligence theory. And the essence of that, because it can feel a little bit academic, but the essence of it is different people receive and process information differently. Well, that's not efficient for a leader, because some people are going to get it when you talk about it. And some people are going to get it when they hear the numbers. And some people are going to get it when they have a conversation. And there are at least 7. I think Gardner has updated his list now to be 8 different primary forms of intelligence. So the leader that wants to get vision out there to as many people as possible, we've got to fight the natural tendency to do it the way we get it. And we've got to cast and communicate the vision in at least 8 different ways. And that I just gave you a few of them. So I'm just trying to explain why it's inefficient, right? You can give a great pep talk to somebody and cast that vision and they get it, and somebody else, they want to do some introspection and they want to think about it. And then some people want to have a conversation with you. Some people want to see it visually depicted. The art smart people. Every leader should have a picture of their vision. It's not going to turn everybody's crank, but some people, that's the only way they're going to get it.
Yeah.
It's just not efficient. And
for me, the power of doing this well is getting more people in the game and not just checking boxes when they come in, right? Is that what you're getting at? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because then you've got something to rally people to. But if they haven't embraced it, then all of the things that you do to get them there's some resistance, if not consciously, subconsciously, is I'm not sure I want to go there. I'm not sure I understand it. I'm not sure I get it. I'm not sure I buy it. So all of the effort that comes post vision casting can be totally wasted.
Yeah, and I think we get better candid feedback as well, rather than with lack of vision, something doesn't work, company goes out of business, something along those lines, and employees leave going, oh yeah, I never thought it would work. Then why did you take a paycheck for so long? But I think, at least my experience, I always get better feedback when they own it. It's like they're running a business within a business that they own. And they want it to win.
Yeah.
Did you notice any of that come out as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want everybody with you. We often use an analogy of a tug of war, and we talk about too many leaders are in a tug of war against their people. And of course you think that's nonsensical. Well, just let me give you a chicken example. When a new restaurant opens and the restaurant operator's on one side of the rope and they're telling their team members they need to say my pleasure and they're saying whatever, or they say you need to wear your name badge and they're going, I can't find my name badge. And you're actually in a tug of war with your people. Well, the best organizations are trying to get everybody onto the same side of the rope and pulling in the same direction, right? You're still in a tug of war, but now you're pulling against your competition and towards your goals. And so part of that process is having people understand what's important, why it's important, what's in it for them. And of course, other things such as the strong culture, which is what gives you the alignment. And, you really want people with you, because if not, they're working against you, even if not, intentionally, but the name tag or the my pleasures. Like, I mean, you can't imagine in a sporting example, the quarterback calls a play and the linemen go, yeah, we know it's a pass play, but we like to run block. Well, you're just not going to do that. Or they're going to be on the bench and then they probably won't be on the team. We have so many people in the organization that are not willing to run the plays that leadership has called. And that goes to engagement. I mean, engagement, and I make a passing reference to this at the beginning of the book. If you look at what Marcus Buckingham has done at ADP, some people recognize that name. He used to be at Gallup, but he's now at ADP. They did a global study a couple of years back. I guess they're doing it annually now, 19 countries, and found that global engagement is at 15%. So you got 85% of the people that really don't care. Wow. Can you imagine trying to create and sustain excellence with 8 out of 10 people that don't care? That's happening in a lot of organizations. Maybe not to that extent, but that's the global average. Last I saw, that number 70% in the US that don't care. And that's a tremendous indictment. I don't think it's an indictment on the worker. I think it's an indictment on leadership.
I think it's both, because I think every adult needs to own at least half of it in the environment that they're in. And the way I say it, and when I said 90% of leadership development dollars are wasted, and you say, well, it's not that high, but it's maybe 80%, so we're close. So I look at the United States. If I just take this country, I don't think we're creating 10% of the value we could be creating as a country. I don't think so. And I think the biggest pent up value creation potential is in low and middle income families, because there's more drive, and the challenge is changing perspective. I mean, I came from a low income family, and I changed my perspective early, and it's worked out incredibly well on so many levels, not just financially, but on the other two categories that I talk about. Mm-hmm. But it's fascinating to me that companies will 100% of the time pay what they agreed to pay in, compensation benefits. And it's okay for team members to give 20, 30, 50% of what they agreed to. And somehow that's okay. And they're even a victim when being asked to do that. What do we do about that culture? I have my thoughts on it, but and it also, one more thing to add there, before you answer, it's a double standard, because these individuals, if they paid somebody, like a couple $1,000s to paint their house, and they painted half of it, it was the wrong color, they wouldn't pay them. Right. So why is it okay for them not to do what they agreed to do when we 100% of the time do? How did we get here?
Yeah, how did we get here? Well, that's enough. We need another hour and some coffee to work on that one. It's a great question. And I do think that there is some individual responsibility, but leaders create the context. Leaders create the circumstances, and leaders can make it exceedingly difficult for people to do what they've been hired to do. Just the fact that they're not well trained. They don't have the tools. They don't have the resources. They're not well led. Gallup says 82% of the managers, that's the term Gallup uses, in America do not know how to do their job. 82%. And so if you believe that leadership is a critical function, as I do, I think it's hard to expect people to excel when they don't have a leader or don't have one that's functional. In fact, they've got one that's dysfunctional in so many cases. So I can't answer your question completely, but I've worked in an organization with engagement numbers in the mid 90s. It's possible. It's possible. And I think it's a direct reflection of leadership. Because if a person won't give their part, then they don't need to work on your team. And the fact they're still on your team is also the leader's responsibility. I had this debate with somebody not too long ago. It's like, well, they're just sorry. And I said, well, and you selected them. B, you're allowing them to stay on your team. So who's sorry here? Right? I mean, set some standards. People tend to rise to the standards that have been set for them, particularly if they're well led, if they're aligned, if they're engaged, and if they have the tools, the resources to execute. I believe in people well led can do exceptional work.
Yeah, I'm really aligned there. I mean, as leaders, we create the environment from which everybody gets to create value, and it can be wildly energizing and fun, and they get the resources they want, the connections, community, all of it. I guess it doesn't seem right for me when it becomes an excuse for everyone, because even in horrible environments, because I started out early working as a dishwasher, busboy, then a cook at a restaurant. And we had one good manager and a bunch of bad ones, but I still went in with, I'm going to be the best at everything that I do. And I think we can own that attitude as well. And if it's not the right environment, we can go somewhere else, but to sit back and get paid and complain about everything and not do anything and not do our best. I just think there's some responsibility there too. And you're right on the leadership side. We agree there. Yeah.
Well, but let's say this. Let's also look at how we measure engagement, because we're going to ask questions about your supervisor, your feedback, your training, your understanding of the mission and vision. And depending on those scores, you're going to be assigned an engagement rating. So it's not, in my mind, completely synonymous with, are you working hard? Maybe you're working hard, but you're not working on the right things, or you don't know what to work on. So you've made stuff up, or maybe you don't have the tools you need. So the work you're doing is not generating or yielding the results that should, reasonably expected as the outcome. So I think you got to put all that in the mix.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. From a global leadership standpoint, so I've been saying for a while, our biggest deficit are leaders that are both capable and moral. And how do we make that happen, across the globe? And when I say moral, it's they make decisions that create net positive value for stakeholders, whatever's going on, not just taking care of their friends and rigging the game in some way. What are your thoughts on what we need to do to make that a thing and start moving it?
Let me put a point on what you just said. Totally agree. We did a study there's only 4,000 leaders in 6 countries. So not as big as Gallup study, but that's a pretty good study, right? It's 4,000 folks from 6 countries. 50% of the senior leaders said they didn't have enough. 33% of them said that it's not solvable. That's the problem. Now, it's not the problem, but that is a problem, that you've got leaders putting something in the too hard pile. If you believe everything rises and falls on leadership, leaders have got to engage, and leaders have got to work on leadership development. Let's go back to where we started this conversation. I think it actually begins, this sounds soft to some people, but with a strategic decision to grow leaders, just like any other. I mean, we're going to do this. And then you got to figure out, what do you believe about leadership? How do you define it? What kind of behaviors do you want your leaders to demonstrate? Again, only 6 in 10 global leaders have a definition, or said they do, but 70% of their frontline leaders don't know about it. So even if they've got it, they've not deployed it, and they've not taken it all the way down to the front lines, which arguably you could say is the most important, because they're the ones with the people who are actually doing the lion's share of the work, right? They're making the food, or serving the food, or building the widgets. And so if you can't get good leadership at the front line, you don't get the benefits of good leadership. So I think they've got to decide, they've got to get a common definition. That'd be the starting point for me.
Yeah. And something you said that's pretty powerful. If a large percentage of leadership doesn't believe it's possible to solve for, well, then it's not going to happen for them. If you can't even believe in it, how's that ever going to happen?
Here's what I tell folks. Hope is not a strategy, but a third of the global leaders aren't even hoping this is going to get better. They're just saying it's not. Yeah. And that is just unacceptable, because it's solvable. It's solvable. And hopefully uncommon greatness will be that building block, as it was for Chick-fil-A 25 years ago. Once you know, one of my favorite quotes, and I would attribute it to someone, but if you Google it, it's like 37 people say they said it. So I'm just going to add my name to that list. A problem well defined is half solved. And if you'll say, here's what leadership looks like for us, and like that senior leader that stood in front of our new supervisors, this may or may not be your definition, but it is our definition. And this is what we're going to recruit for. We're going to select for. We're going to train, educate, develop, recognize, and promote for men and women who do these things. Any organization in the world can develop leaders.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, one of the things I fully believe to my bones is that every single person can be developed to create more value than they have to that point, including you and I. And there are some leaders out there that look at people and say, oh, they'll never do more than this. I only had one of those over the years. And I said, that's interesting. You can't be a leader here anymore. And that was it. He was done as a leader.
Sure.
So everybody can be developed. In our conversation, which I can't believe how fast this has gone by, my biggest takeaway was your statement, for themselves, but not by themselves. What a cool way to set people up for success and have the strength of community around them to go even faster when it comes to value.
It's a big idea.
It's a really big idea. Was there any one takeaway from our discussion for you that kind of stood out?
I just think we've got to continue to encourage leaders. Everything does rise and fall on leadership. I mean, I'm going to start with the vision card, right? Businesses and homes and schools and churches and armies and hospitals, and everything rises and falls on leadership. And if we'll step up, the world will be a better place.
I love that. If our listeners want to learn more about the work you're doing, your book, where can they go to find out about that?
Well, let me start by giving you my cell number. It's 678-612-8441, because typically somebody's got a question and I'd love to hear from you, and I'll do my very best to answer the question. You can also email me, mark@leadeveryday.com. And then our website is leadeveryday.com.
All right. Well, thank you. Really appreciate the conversation. This has been fantastic, Mark.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity.
Yeah, you got it. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of this episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, have an amazing value creating week.